And Amy, last night's vice presidential debate, I thought Mike Pence did a very good job on the topic that the left wants to talk about the most, that is hurting the Trump administration the most politically, that is COVID. And that was the first topic that the two candidates tackled. And I thought Pence provided a nice summation after Kamala Harris was asked what exactly the Biden plan was. You know, it's one thing to just accuse the president, try and hang 200,000 dead Americans around the neck of the Trump administration. It's another thing to say, well, okay, what would you have done differently? And by the way, we have some statements you've made along the way on the record that suggest some things you would have done differently and some things you wouldn't have, and some things that you would have done differently would have worked out worse for the country. For example, closing off travel from China. And Kamala Harris basically said, we would do things better than they would. We wouldn't have done this and we wouldn't have done that. All these things that are sort of unprovable abstractions. And Pence summarized it as such.
The reality is, when you look at the Biden plan, it reads an awful lot like what President Trump and I and our task force have been doing every step of the way. I mean, quite frankly, when I look at their plan that talks about advancing testing, creating new PPE, developing a vaccine, it looks a little bit like plagiarism, which is something Joe Biden knows a little bit about.
Nice deadpan ding. I don't think Kamala Harris was expecting that from Mike Pence, a shot across the bow early on in the debate. But the larger point that he was making, in no uncertain terms, is, look, you've heard from the beginning Trump's reliance on those advisors around him. How many times has not just Trump said it, but Tony Fauci said, I've always been listened to. I've never been shut up. The president has been transparent, has relayed the things that I've said in private meetings, and has largely followed the recommendations of CDC and Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, including with something he didn't want to do, which is to shut down the economy, that he no longer wants to maintain, but the Democrats do. So there's a difference for consideration in present.
And the Democrats are blaming Trump now for a failed economy and for kids not being in school.
Right. They're blaming him for the consequences of policies they too supported. That was the point that Pence made. So the Trump administration is responsible for all the anticipated negative consequences of policies that they pursued. Democrats supported it, but they're not responsible, and they actually want to perpetuate them where Republicans don't. And then for things that they didn't support that now don't look like the position now doesn't look so attractive, as I mentioned, as Pence mentioned, like shutting down travel from China and then other parts of the world subsequently. They just sort of gloss over that. It's all about it's just about essentially making the accusation that all of these people who died of COVID wouldn't have died if Biden and Harris were, if Biden and Harris were in charge. And Biden has previously leaned on his record, how Obama and Biden did it back in 2009 with the swine flu. Well, Mike Pence is so glad you brought that up. He was waiting all week to offer a review of the Obama-Biden performance on swine flu.
You know, the reality is, when you talk about failure in this administration, we actually do know what failure looks like in a pandemic. It was 2009. The swine flu arrived in the United States. Thankfully, it ended up not being as lethal as the coronavirus. But before the end of the year, when Joe Biden was vice president of the United States, not 7.5 million people contracted the swine flu. 60 million Americans contracted the swine flu. If the swine flu had been as lethal as the coronavirus in 2009, when Joe Biden was vice president, we would have lost 2 million American lives.
And that sort of ended that segment. I don't think Kamala Harris was expecting that either.
Because it was the facts and it was the truth.
Well, it's a hypothetical, but yeah, it's a salient one, isn't it?
And then she tried to scare Americans, like looking at the camera, saying, "You better watch out."
He interrupted me, and I'd like to just finish.
When it comes to health care,
if you have a pre-existing condition, heart disease, diabetes, breast cancer, they're coming for you. If you love someone who has a pre-existing condition, they're coming for you. If you are under the age of 26 on your parents' coverage, they're coming for you.
Senator Harris, thank you.
You're welcome.
I mean, please. Trying to play tough lady there?
On the matter of COVID, the Pence performance was important because it wasn't over the top about what a wonderful job we did. We couldn't have done anything better. He didn't go into things that perhaps could have gone better, but it was restrained. That's why it was helpful. It was well thought out. It was presented in complete sentences. It was on the mark. It was laden with specifics, but it was also restrained. Of course, things could have gone better. You know, we were caught flat-footed in so many respects, as previous administrations were, and what we inherited from previous administrations were. But yes, if we could have known 6 months later, if we could have known what we know 6 months later, 6 months ago, would that have changed some of the decisions we made? Of course it was, because we would have had more knowledge. It's still imperfect knowledge today, but we would have more knowledge.
And it changes every day.
The humility, I think, is something that's important. The restraint is something that's important because I think most reasonable people will understand. Nobody can, through the power of their personality, stop the spread of a virus without consequence. These apocryphal stories of Joe Biden standing on the eastern seaboard and stopping Ebola from coming ashore. I mean, they're ridiculous. But it requires restraint and humility in tackling something as big and complicated and, to some extent, unstoppable as a particularly infectious virus. And I think without getting into, using that language, Pence conveyed that last night, and I think that was helpful on the topic, too.
And real quick, some breaking news. I know we told you, on the other side of the break that the second presidential debate is going to be virtual with the candidates in separate locations, but still the moderator and the town hall participants in Miami. Well, President Trump has just gone on with Maria Bartiromo and said he is not going to do the virtual debate.
Good. He shouldn't. It's without point. You might that's not a debate. That's the format of these ghastly cable news network shows. Absolutely.
Zoom
shouldn't
call.
do it.
Right.
Shouldn't do it. For more on all this, we're pleased to be joined again by Noah Rothman, associate editor for Commentary Magazine, author of the book Unjust, Social Justice and the Unmaking of America. Noah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So before we comment on the format of the next debate, if there's going to be one, how about your review of the Pence-Harris debate last night?
Well, I think I'm in the minority because I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it.
So did I.
It was a throwback to the before time when you could. It was what we used to call politics, the artful act of shivving your opponent and putting words in their mouth, while at the same time maintaining a patina of discipline and decorum and civility. That is the dance. That's the choreography that anybody who loves politics was lured into this business, being attracted to that kind of depth and craft. And we saw a lot of that last night, and it was actually relatively substantive. And I thought it was an informative debate. It's a VP debate. It won't matter at all, even a little bit, but it was still very, very fun and very valuable.
But did he Pence had to try to, gain ground on national polls because they're slipping, and in some swing states as well. Did he do that last night? Did he give American people and Republicans confidence that he and Trump can handle another 4 years?
Possibly. I'm like I said, I'm of the opinion that vice presidential debates generally don't matter. This one probably matters a little bit more than most, insofar as the two candidates together, combined age of about 150 years. So a vice president really does have some weight, and obviously it matters more for Kamala Harris than Mike Pence, because Mike Pence has been vice president, so he's demonstrated his capacity to be vice president. Nevertheless, if you're a loosely committed voter, a persuadable voter at this point, you're not ideological, you don't really vote on policy, otherwise you would have made up your mind by now. You vote on personality, you vote on conduct, on people who make you feel safe, who you trust, and in those terms, I think both of them hit their marks. Both of them were able to pass whatever that bar is. And you, as a loosely committed voter tend not to vote for the second candidate on the ticket. You vote for the ticket. So it's the president who matters.
Interesting. Although, there's two things. I don't necessarily agree with your assessment of Kamala Harris. I agree with how much you enjoyed it. I'm in the same camp, and it was because of Pence's performance. It seemed to me that he did the same thing he did in 2016, which is nicely dispatch both on substance and style a media-inflated senator. Kamala Harris strikes me as somebody who you can see on any given Sunday talk show, repeating the lines that have been leveled against President Trump by that punditry set for the last 4 years, and not much underneath that. She seems to me she performed in the same way that earned her a early exit from her own party's primary.
Yeah, sure. I think, and this isn't probably going to win me any popularity contests, but I do think that Kamala Harris came in there with reasonably low expectations, in part because I think her performance during the primaries was abysmal. She was easy to knock off message. Whatever poll testing they did around, get Donald Trump off Twitter, and her support for Medicare for all, and her lack of preparation for the attacks that were levied on her record by Tulsi Gabbard, suggested that she wasn't a very good debater. She was relentlessly on message last night, to the exclusion, in fact, of areas where she could have made some hay. Like Pence, for example, would make a statement that is easily exploitable, and she passed on the opportunity to do so, because to do so would have been to improvise. And she would not improvise. Mm-hmm. That was very disciplined. And whatever you think of her performance, what she was saying, that conduct demonstrates that she's very well prepared, and she was very capable of executing the campaign strategy. And that's all that matters, because whether or not you don't have to believe the polls are 100% correct. If they're even remotely accurate at this point, they've got a big cushion. It's the Trump campaign that needs to make up ground.
Yeah.
And I don't think they did it last night.
Although
they didn't lose any ground.
But that's not the point. I mean, you're right. Not losing ground is not picking up ground. And so this is the same argument coming out of the presidential debate, which was, well, I don't think anybody changed their mind. Well, that wasn't the point. The point, per the expectations, was that Trump was going to wipe the floor with Joe Biden, and that was going to be a springboard to victory. And that's not what happened, and so that's a problem. But with respect to Pence, Noah, it seems to me that, yes, I agree with you. There's limited upside for a vice presidential debate, perhaps more so this year, as you said. But it also provides a bit of a segue from what happened last week to what can happen in the next 3 weeks. And now it's really going to be up to the president to try to build upon that inflection that Pence provided, I think, last night.
Yeah, and there's an opportunity to do so. I heard you say that you don't think that the president should participate in a remote debate.
Yeah.
In part because the format is going to be terrible. And I agree, the format will be terrible. It certainly won't advantage Donald Trump, who feeds off an audience and is very good interacting with a live audience in the room. And the interchange will be very difficult. Anybody who's done like a Zoom call for the benefit of an audience will tell you that it's a rough format. However, if the narrative holds that it becomes now Donald Trump has backed out of this debate, I don't think that lasts. I don't think he has any chance but to participate in this debate if that's the narrative, because once again, he's on defense, and you can't play prevent defense when you're down 10 points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but can he demand to the commissioner, I'm not afraid to go there, and I will be 12 feet apart, and I will not, come close to any of the town hall participants? Is that a possibility that he can be there? And if Joe Biden is so afraid, he could go, be virtual from his basement.
Yeah, I think honestly, I'm not a medical expert, but I don't think that this is necessary. I think it's an excessive response.
Of course,
being safety conscious makes sense, but this is now 2 weeks after the president's diagnosis, and all information that we have suggests that he should be well beyond the point at which he's contagious at that point. So I understand the impulse towards caution. I think it's probably a little too much. But nevertheless, this is the age in which we're in.
Yeah.
Every day is a news cycle.
Well,
every 5 minutes is a different news cycle.
Well, it's the age at which we're in. What I take you to mean is the age of absurd overreaction, and we saw it a little bit last night. We saw it a little bit last night.
You said it.
With Susan Page. Now you have 1 minute uninterrupted. Now you have 2 minutes uninterrupted. We get it. There were interruptions in the presidential debate. This isn't the presidential debate. And they heard you 3 times the first 10 times. Okay, relax.
Right.
I mean, it's so childish.
And then we got, they actually broke down the amount of time that each candidate spoke. And there's some divergent, math. ABC has a different math than CNN, what have you. Bottom line is they both spoke for roughly equivalent times. But Mike Pence was chastised repeatedly, both by his opponent and the moderator, for abusing their time. But he didn't abuse his time. They had the same amount of time.
Right.
Kamala Harris did too. I mean, she abused her time.
Well, also, the point is this. These are a vice president, a vice presidential candidate. When we get it, here are the rules: 2 minute answers, 1 minute responses, so on and so forth. You just say, thank you, Mr. Vice President, and that's a signal to complete your thought, and then we'll move on. You don't need to see thank you after every word he's trying to get out when he's got one sentence left. Chill the frack out. You know what I mean?
Right, precisely. There's one thing about this debate. I don't know if you noticed it, but a lot of them weren't very interested in answering the questions they were asked.
Right.
Yes.
This was a source of a lot of consternation for people who were watching this debate. The moderators need to intervene and jump on this and force them to answer the questions they were asked, which is incredibly insulting. The audience knows when they're not answering a question,
right.
And those non-answers are as edifying as an answer. But it reveals the campaign's hand. I'm thinking of a couple of instances. For example, Mike Pence, when asked about climate, he would pivot to the Green New Deal. When asked about pre-existing conditions, he pivoted to abortion and Amy Coney Barrett. When asked about a peaceful transition of power, if the ticket loses, he talked about impeachment. Kamala Harris, similarly. Do you have a COVID plan? Talks about Trump's response. Are you going to pack the court? Talks about appointments and vacancies and the number of black justices on the bench. Everything else, talk about Joe Biden. Those are the camp's strengths. That tells you what their internal polling says about what the issues are. And to me, it suggested that Mike Pence has the edge on issues and Kamala Harris has the edge on the candidate. The candidate polls really well.
Yeah.
And that's the dynamic, and that's going to be a killer if you're the Trump campaign.
I think that's a good insight in terms of how that was playing out. One other thing, for those people complaining about not answering the questions, well, you could have more interplay on the questions if Susan Page didn't have to pretend to look smart by reading, 2 minutes worth of lead up to the question that somebody had prepared for her about this study and this expert who said this and other experts say this and so blah, 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 blah. Just ask the question. It's up to the candidates to present interesting, specific information, studies and surveys and anecdotes and so forth about a particular topic, for goodness sakes.
You are all over her, Dan. Ooh, next, you should be the moderator.
I told
you would be a great moderator.
No, I said I knew it was going to be a problem with Susan Page, not because she's the bureau chief for Washington bureau chief for USA Today, but because she was a former editor-in-chief of the Daily Northwestern, and I just knew that's disqualifying.
You went to Northwestern.
Noah Rothman, he's not going to comment on it. He doesn't want to get on the wrong side of the Wildcats. Noah Rothman, associate editor for Commentary Magazine, author of the book Unjust: Social Justice and the Unmaking of America. Noah, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Noah. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile. On Target, radio is back on AM 560. Every Sunday night at 9, Dave Lombardo and Gretchen Fritz discuss the red meat issues that affect your life. The Second Amendment, personal liberty, government intrusion. They'll also bring you the latest from the Washington and Springfield swamps on Target Radio.